I am the president of the Indigenous Student Association here at the University of Regina. I'm also 1/4 Youth Reconciliation Initiative leader for the Canadian Roots Exchange. First of all, on behalf of, we would like to thank the elder, Bob Smoker, for his prayer. We would like to thank Marley Littleton for honoring us with that song. What we're doing here tonight is we're going to have a discussion. Now we all know that the inquiry is in the process of being in place. We're not here to say otherwise, really. We're here to discuss on what we can do on an individual level. As individuals, how can we reassure the safety of our women? As men, it's our job to protect them, support them. We, as First Nations people, we speak very highly of our women, life givers, our mothers, sisters, daughters, friends. They're our counsel, they're our shelter. Even as men, we seek refuge to them when we feel weak. So, how do we go about protecting our women? See, this is the discussion that we wish to have tonight. We wish to leave you with more understanding. But also, we are here to honor our missing and murdered Indigenous women. So, just because inquiry is in place, which is a beautiful thing, which is what we need, it's our jobs to help the process, to know how to go about it, so that anybody involved knows what to do when it comes down to it. So where do we go from here? Well, we have invited people here tonight to discuss that, to carry on the discussion. Sorry. May I remind everyone to shut off their phones. So, we've invited our speakers, Dr. Shani Deep, and Brenda Dubois. Now, we as teams, we all did this together. Now, how we came about coming across their names was we've asked people. We've asked, well, who can speak on this? Who can speak on this? Who? And the people cried out these two names. These warriors. Before we get to that, I want to introduce somebody else. These is a brother of mine who's graciously accepted my invite to come and perform for you. He's put together a production specifically for this event to honor our women. What he's going to be presenting to you is a form of hoop dance. And for those who are not familiar with the hoop dance, it is an old traditional way of storytelling. When we cannot understand each other's linguistics, we have this dance, and it's been adopted by many cultures. Now, what you are about to see, parents had this dream many years ago. He had a dream in the day of a life of a Cree, a Hale warrior. And you'll see, as he goes about his day, he's hunting, he's gathering, he's doing what he needs to do to survive. And you're going to see that in the end of it all, it comes down to our women. As I said before, they're our counsel, our shelter. Basically everything beautiful in this world. So, we have the hoop dance. There's something else attached to the hoop dance that goes along with it. Basically all we do, the heartbeat of Mother Earth. We have the drum. We have that song. So without further ado, I'd like to invite Parents Little Pen to the stage, please. To honor our women in a sacred way that our cultures have adopted throughout all of time immemorial. This is the way we contact each other. So without spoken word, you're going to see things. You're going to understand. So ladies and gentlemen, Terrence's production, Warrior's Dream, in honor of the woman.
we have Dr. Shawnee P. She is the head of the Indigenous department here at U of R and has been an educator for 25 years. Dr. Pete is a professional and contemporary storyteller, and we are very fortunate to have her here to speak tonight. And with that being said, please welcome Dr. Shawnee Pete.
I'm originally from Little Pine First Nation, and my mother's from Houses. My father is Jacob Pete, and my mother is Eileen Ajapute. I'm the oldest of 3 kids, and I have 3 children. I have 2 daughters. My oldest is 32, my youngest is 21, and my son is 23. Growing up in Saskatchewan, and growing up with parents who went to university here, I learned very early on about what systemic oppressions were about. My parents were both residential schooled, as were their parents and their grandparents. And in my family, people would gather around in the living room and they talk about the dynamics of social oppression over coffee. So I grew up in this environment as a little child, playing with Duplo or blocks or whatever the heck we had back then. And I would hear this dynamic discussion happening amongst my elders, amongst my parents and their siblings and their friends. Both of them were urbanized straight out of residential school, and so neither of them returned home to the reserve. And they lived here behind the Golden Mile in the apartments. And that's where they first, when they first got together, that's where they lived. And my mom and dad met at a little restaurant we now call the Via Thai. My dad was taken from residential school and brought straight to the RCMP depot, and he became one of the first RCMP officers in Canada to be First Nations. And my mom did what she was advised to do, which was to become a secretary. My mom was working for Indian Affairs back in the day. But they were both quite disgruntled with the effects of traumas that had been inflicted upon family members and friends who had experienced the residential school system as well as forced urbanization. And so I was probably, for the first time I heard those really strong words about colonization and settlement and racism and institutional forms of racism. And I couldn't help but to be steeped in that language, so it shouldn't surprise you I'm an anti-racist educator. My mom and dad talked quite openly about the history that we experienced. And my dad tells a story about how after the reserve system was set up, Indigenous women, First Nations women, wanted to continue to be able to serve their families, to be able to continue to feed their families. But within that reserve structure, they were structurally denied the opportunity to do that through both the pass and the permit system. And the way that the RCMP and settlers took up Indigenous women's assertion that they needed to feed their families and do so well to call for the rations that were being denied to them was to characterize Indigenous women in a very negative way. In the North Battleford area, the reference to the word squaw and tor were often combined, and women were no longer allowed to come into the city or come into town to pick up supplies or rations, and so it left it to the men. And they posed another kind of threat, right, to the settlers. And as Indigenous women in the area began to be sexualized and trade for rations, the Indigenous men in our community rose up and were quite active in the resistance in 1885. That resulted in further sanctions on their movements and threats for jail time. And so this whole system of institutional oppression starts a really long time ago. And even though Stephen Harper liked to deny that any of it was systemic, he was certainly a part of it and maintaining it. So it shouldn't surprise us that Indigenous men and women continue to be sexualized and violated, and that violence is directed towards them. We were always in the way. We were always in the way of settlement and that recreation of a colonial dream. we were in the way. And so we needed to be eradicated by these emerging governments and community members that felt that their rights and their needs were to be asserted over ours. The dehumanization of Indigenous people began a very long time ago, and it continued to intensify with the preceding generations. And so I knew that it was going to be tough to be an Indian girl in Regina. In the residential school system, we were taught violence, we were taught aggression, we were taught silence. And in that system, it's not surprising that particularly high levels of lateral violence also became taught to our family members and to our ancestors. And so many of us here can think of many examples of the ways in which that played out for us personally. As a child and as a young teenager, my brown body was sexualized over and over again in lots of different ways, in the comments that were made, in the looks that were given to me, and in the unwanted attention, the physical attention that this body had to cope with. As a teenager, and as a young person starting to explore my own sexuality, I couldn't help but be triggered and reminded of the ways in which this brown body had been violated again and again. When I became a mother, it changed everything. My oldest daughter, Lena, was born when I was 18, and I was kind of freaked out, not only to be a parent at such a young age, but to be a parent of a daughter and to really want to actively protect her from the experiences that I had had. And I grew up in a really good family. My father was an RCMP officer. My mom came to university, so did my dad. We were middle-class Indians in 1970. Can you imagine such a thing? Nobody else could either. We were like the only brown people on the south end of the city. The message that I received consistently in that neighborhood was that you really don't belong here, do you? And it was really hard not to internalize that sometimes. But to become a parent and to face the fear of raising a daughter in such a violent world, in a world that dehumanizes Indigenous peoples and Indigenous girls in particular, was really problematic for me. So my response to that situation was to be really overprotective. So I didn't let my kids go for sleepovers, and I really drilled all the parents in the neighborhood about who they were and what their houses were like, and I had to visit them first, and I was kind of a fanatical person. It was kind of scary sometimes. When it came to my neighbors, who were like, boy, she asked a lot of questions. Around a lot, too. So overprotective. What's going on? And my kids were like, why are you like that? Why are you so hard on us, Mom? And how do you explain that to little people? So when my son came along and my youngest daughter they were little children, they would fight sometimes the way little kids do, right? The older brother and the younger sister combination always seems fraught. So there was a time when in my living room the kids were arguing with each other and they were kind of not being very nice to each other, and I kind of had enough of it. And I thought, well, I can yell, but I'm not going to do that. So I'm going to take them for a walk. And so I took each child in each one of my hands, one on each side, and I walked them down the street to the park. And we sat down on this really big rock that was in the park. And I said to them, you are such a gift to one another. My son, you have this huge responsibility to teach your sister first love. And my dear daughter, you have the complementary task of teaching your brother first love too. And I turned to my son and I said, if you teach your sister that if she does something that you don't like and you yell at her and then she changes her behavior, you're training her to love in a particular way and in a dysfunctional way. And he was real quiet. And I turned to my daughter and I said, if you teach your brother that if you whine enough and cry around enough and make accusations enough, you're teaching him another kind of love too, and that's not very helpful. because then he won't be able to recognize true love in his life. And so I said to them, you have this huge responsibility to show each other and be for each other first love. They cried, and they held each other. And then I gave them each Kleenex, and they wiped each other's eyes. And we walked back home, and I hope that's a lesson and to stay with them for the rest of their days. I think it does, because they love each other dearly in a new way. But it's hard to teach that to your children at the same time when you're in a relationship with people who haven't done their work, their own inner work to heal themselves from their past, who haven't dealt with their own denial of their own lived experience, and they haven't gone through the healing path work to try and begin to leave that behind them and live a life in a loving and caring way. And so I left their father, and I had to parent through divorce, and it wasn't easy, and they saw things that they weren't very happy about, and that my son says has scarred him. And for that, I'm really, really sorry. I tried to protect them from that too. But I recognize sometimes those hurtful moments and those difficult moments can be our teachers too. And so I remind them, how did you cope? How did you get over it? And they said, well, you took us to counseling an awful lot. That's when we started going to the sweat lodge. And we started to visit with elders. And we brought sweetgrass home and we smudged together in the morning. Relation with one another as a family. When I was in university, I met a family, the Muskego family. Pauline and Herb were my classmates, and I was part of the student leadership. And we organized a whole new party for the families, and Pauline's daughter, Delene, was a young girl there, and she sat with my daughter, and they were sharing candies, and they were dressed in their costumes. My daughter was a unicorn, and Delene was a princess. And these little girls were reading to each other and laughing, and it was a really beautiful memory for me. And flash forward 2 years later, and Delene went missing. And I couldn't imagine what that would be like for me as a parent, how that would shut me down, even with all my experience. And as a mother, I reached out to Delene and her and expressed my deep sadness of her loss. And both of them were so gracious. They had great faith in the Creator. They had great faith in their Christian values. And they were getting through this, through the help of their family and through their friends, and through many people who were strangers who recognized how devastating it would be to go through a process like that. The not knowing and the fear and the uncertainty and the hope and the cycle of hope and grief again and again and again as perhaps it needs to come forward. And so each time one of our people goes missing, we're triggered, and it touches us deeply inside, and we feel that fear, and we feel that anger, and we feel that sadness all over again, and we must be stronger for one another. We have to circle around those that are grieving, and we have to stand with them and be strong for them even when we're hurting. We have to be stronger, and that means we have to be healthier. So in all of our relationships, we have to be open and honest. We have to take care of our business, our old stuff, the old hurts, the old pains, stuff that we need to heal from. And we need to do that in a healthier way by joining in prayer with the elders, by learning those prayers and songs, by coming together in communion, by walking in the marches, by learning. And so that's where I'm going to divert into another topic. I'm a teacher. And as a teacher, I recognize within my women students oftentimes the same kind of rising anger that I had expressed myself as a young person, that rising anger and defensiveness where I didn't want people to see my brown body, my brown female body in particular. I didn't want those to be beautiful. I didn't want to shine because then people see you and it makes you vulnerable. And I didn't like that feeling at all, so I tried to hide. I wore really big clothes for a long time, and I didn't wear makeup, and I didn't do my hair, and I tried not to be seen. But we can't dim the light out of fear. We can't dim our light so that people can't see us, because it's through those erasures that this form of oppression continues on. It's through those erasures, when they're invisible, that they can say that this isn't a systemic issue or that it's not high on their radar. And so we must be seen. And we must be seen out in the public and in our personal lives, and we'll carry ourselves well, we'll adorn ourselves, and we'll take ourselves out with our beautiful families. And we'll sit with our beautiful daughters and sons, and we'll teach them new ways of being with one another. And as a teacher, I'm really upfront. And so when one of my students in my high school where I taught, she was such an angry young woman. She was one of those people that you thought would just kind of break you real quick, just on a limb. And I walked up to her one day and I said to her, I can see how angry you are. I can see how painful your life experience has probably been. And I suspect that, like me, you survived it. She was ticked off. Who do you think you are? Seeing that me? How dare you say that about me? And I said, well, I'm just noticing things. So just know that I know these things. And so if you feel at any time that you want to come and talk to me, please feel free to do that. And she stomped out of my classroom. She was peeled. A couple days later, she came to see me and she said, you know what, you're the first person who's acknowledged my anger. Everybody else is too afraid to. And she said, I think I want to talk with you about my experience. And so I listened and I told her, like, there's lots of services around and lots of supports. We have a guidance counselor here, we have an elder in residence here. I mean, it doesn't have to be me. If you don't like me, I'm okay with that. I can let go of that one. And I said that there's lots of people here who can care, who can listen and can help. And I know some support services in the city that can be supportive for you. And I said, but it's really up to you. You can make that first step towards healing and know that I'll still be here, whether you like me or not. And so she said, I think I want to go see the counselor. And I said, okay, I'm good with that. And she went down. And she began a path of healing that I think was really helpful for her. When she graduated, she volunteered at a youth center. And she met other angry young women. And she passed it, played that forward. And eventually she went on to be a social worker. So we have to be seen so that we can help in the process of change. And as teachers and educators, we have a responsibility to take these issues out of the silence and make them more visible in our public institutions. And in the work that we've been doing here, Brenda, I think I was here on this stage in 2008, and I think I stood right here, kind of having a flashback of it.
Yeah.
There was an international conference on missing and murdered Indigenous women that was held here. Brenda was one of the organizers. And there were women from all over the world coming and telling their stories about sexualized violence that was directed towards them. And we also had talks about how it's also our men that go missing. And we talked about a lot of different topics. It was a difficult weekend for me. My boyfriend had just died, so I was grieving myself, and all of these things were quite raw as I stood on the stage that night or that day. And it takes you back into that place of knowing that you have to speak the truth of our very painful past and do it well. And so that our work here at the university continued to expand from there. Brenda published a book with her colleagues on the conference and some of the presentations. We've had numerous missing and murdered Indigenous women events here and at First Nations University of Canada to continue to keep it high profile and to offer families affected in more intimately with a place to come and be seen and to be heard. And we can offer our support to them in that way too. And so last year we had a World Cafe event on campus, and it was directed towards students and towards faculty and towards community. And we asked the students the question, what are the sources of knowledge that you're getting from the university to learn about missing and murdered Aboriginal peoples? And it wasn't happening, except in women and gender studies. In a course that's not on the books regularly, they continue to have to argue for its inclusion so that it can be offered. And so, as we attempt to decolonize and indigenize the university, we have to take up some really tough battles about what is the curriculum and how it will be taught and who gets to teach it and all of those things. And I think we fight those good battles. And we do because we know that we want to raise the profile of these issues and make them more accessible to people. One of the students who spoke during one of the roundtable events, she said, it's not even an elective that's named in my program. She was in engineering. She said the only 2 elective courses that are named in the course calendar are English and history, and then ... So for folks in engineering, you know, you're in first year, second year, and you're going to sign up for your courses. Guess what you take as an elective? English or history. Why? Because it's easy and it's named. It's easy and it's named, and then you don't have to do the work of figuring out what ... means, right? So there's an overly large number of students on this campus who can graduate with never having heard of missing and murdered Aboriginal people, who might never have learned about residential schools, and who probably certainly didn't learn about the pass and permit system or the entire system of oppression that continues on in Canada, because it's in that ... category. And what we're working really strongly to do is to recenter those topics so that everyone knows it. And then everyone can raise their voices towards addressing this issue systemically to counteract that violence and the silence and the diminishing of how prevalent this issue is. The conferences and the workshops and the round dances and all of the events that we've had have continued to generate a large circle of allies with us. So one of the marches that we had, we met over at Greenland, and we were going to walk towards the ledge. I've been doing presentations in churches around the city for a few years now. So I go to the Unitarian Church and the Lutherans, the Anglicans, and the United Churches. They keep inviting me back, so I just keep going. My friends laugh when I say, oh, I've got to go to church tomorrow. Really? Yeah, they actually do. So when I go into those white spaces, predominantly white spaces, I talk about the truth of our histories, and I put it out there for them. And most of the time, the responses are, I didn't know that. I've never heard of that before. I can't believe that happens. I can't believe that it happens. I don't know about you, but how many of you are on Facebook? Okay. How often, like in a day, do you see missing and murdered Aboriginal references coming up? Like every day, like pretty much. I'm seeing them every day. How can you not know? How can you not know? How can you not know? Ignorance is not an excuse any longer. And we're doing our job here at the university to correct what has been taken for granted as the curriculum here. And we're going to do that in lots of little spaces and lots of spaces throughout the university. I'm pleased to see my education students here. I'm pleased to see them here because they will be those teachers working with those angry young women. And I hope that we recognize the sign within them. And even though it makes us personally uncomfortable to hear it, that you will have done the work to reach out to the community and the agencies so that you can direct young people towards healing. And that through your work here with the elders and residents programs on campus, that you'll be able to have at least a community source of support that you can direct people to. When we are no longer ignorant, our first response will no longer be denial. And so when families experience these losses, we can come to them and we can stand like a protective circle around them as they grieve. And we will be stronger.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pete, for your inspirational words. It's indeed an honor to have you with us this evening. Hello, Tassé. My name is Austin Josephson. I am Métis and very grateful to be part of this amazing youth reconciliation team. This evening's event is extremely important, and I want to thank all of you for being with us this evening. This is such an important issue, and there needs to be more dialogues, events like this, people coming together, talking about it, learning about it. Most importantly, we're here tonight because we know that these Indigenous women were someone's mother, sister, daughter, grandmother, cookum, auntie, niece, or friend. By putting on this event, we're raising awareness. We as a group, we as a community, we're a voice for those who have been silenced. Before I announce our 10 to 15 minute intermission, I would like for all of us to take a moment to quietly acknowledge the women in our lives, our sisters, mothers, daughters, grandmothers, or cookums, aunties, cousins, nieces, girlfriends, and wives. They mean the world to us, and they are part of our families and communities.
My name is Christy Strauss. I'm the director of events for the Indigenous Youth Association. It's an honor to introduce our next speaker. There are many words that can describe her. Mother, grandmother, sister, activist, community member, youth worker, and for many years she has worked in the field of youth and family services within North Central Regina. She compassionately supports others who have lost mothers, grandmothers, sisters, cousins, aunties, and nieces. For many years, she has been involved with Sisters in Spirit Vigil and committees working together to support our community. She brings forth the crisis of missing and buried Indigenous women along with many other very real concerns faced by our North peoples on a daily basis. On a daily basis, she provides the opportunity for families and youth to reconnect with the fundamental teachings of culture, language, and spirit as a means to heal from the historical traumas of colonization. This woman embodies the strength that can be gained by walking the red road of our traditional chief religion. Her daily commitment and actions to support healthy families inspire us all to find our own way to living honorably through sharing our gifts with one another. It is my pleasure to introduce Brenda Dubois.
A good way this evening. Shake everybody's hand and see that you're out. Those are very big shoes to fit, and I have very small feet. I'm always honored with the opportunity to come and add my voice in the community. I don't have a very much curriculum vitae, what people say in education field, anything like that. I'm actually 59 years old. Monday. But I've heard every piece of it. And I wouldn't change it because it made me who I am today. I come from Muscatine community. My Indian name is Little Red Fox. People wonder, and sometimes people may say, what do I have in connection to this issue around murder missing Indigenous women? I need to be honest. I don't have anybody that is missing. However, I need to let you know that my goal was murdered in the city. It almost feels as if I still need to prove it because she is one of the ones that is uncounted in the numbers out there. And that is a reality. There are many more than were uncounted in those numbers. But as a young girl growing up in the city, I think I grew up in what maybe a lot of our youth grew up in. A bubble that we think is invincible and that it won't happen to us. But yet, during my teen years, losing Elaine Flowers, her sister within 2 weeks, the young girl that was found by the co-op refinery, the other book that was thrown in the ditch. Slowly started awakening my own mind and heart to the reality that any one of us can be harmed. And the harsh reality for me in going back was having to realize that yes, I was lucky to make it home, considering some of the things that I did, thinking that I was invincible and that it wouldn't touch me. So when I was asked to speak by Lee, I always take time to think about it. I also pray smudge, ask, what should I say? And the first question that came was, how do you right a wrong? We're in truth and reconciliation, or we're also dealing with the issue of murdered and missing Indigenous women. And really, I don't want us to address it anymore. Address is a really beautiful word in the English language. It means to speak to. We have spoken to this for years, for generations. We need to redress it. So you understand the redress and why that word is coming up. Redress means to mend, to fix. It's about time we do reparation. Damage has been done. But the question was echoing in the back of my mind. How do you redress a right and wrong? So if you don't mind, if you could cooperate with me for a minute, because sometimes I do that too. I ask you to close your eyes during the balance of my presentation. Or in it, then maybe you go to a different place. Because I want you to go not to the thinking place, which we're all somewhat good at, but I want you to go to the feeling place. Because before we do, we have to process thought through that special place. So in trying to redress a wrong, part of me, our thoughts went a little bit back. And I know Charlene alluded to some of those facts, but I figured I'd go back a little bit to you again. Not to hurt you, but to awaken you to a reality of what and how Indian women are affected and infected by the acts that happen through our lifespans. I need to ask a question. Not to answer, but to think about it. Because I did for a moment. Because I was involved with the issue of sexual exploitation in our community. And I tried to think how long this has been going on. What I had to realize was admit the truth. What was the first act of exchange between the colonizers and our people? They were sold, exchanged for pots, pans, and beads. Indian women. This country was made off the backs of Indian women. Clearing the territory, making homes, having babies. And you know, I used to also wonder, where did that word relief come from? Because nowadays they call it welfare. Well, when it was time for some of these men to go back, the trappers to go back, they abandoned these women. They used to see pictures of the teepees outside the forts. That's where these women gathered. And it was through the kindness of a gentleman in the Hudson Bay. He listened. He saw what was going on. And what he said was, I will tax all the trappers that come in and hurt you. And that money shall be used to feed you and help you. It's really weird. Because as a young girl, I still remember that word. Relief. Listen to what it was relief. remember pre-colonization. And its work, we pray, comes back and is going on in our communities. Imagine yourself, a young girl, a young boy, being raised to understand your roles and your responsibilities from the time since you were born. Young girls being explained their coming of age, their rites of passage, and what they need to understand. And young boys the same too. And I need to remind you, through that exchange, young men spend time with women, aunties, uncles, in order to learn how to respect women. So, you also have to understand a little bit. I'm not going to jump all over the place, but I hope you get it. You understand a little bit too about our language. You know, in our language, there's no such word as walk. There isn't. It's actually a beautiful word. It's a square woman. Quick back words that did not exist. The other part about language, sort of, I have little itches that get me again, but I've been reading lately different things in literature, newspaper, referring to us in some context that we're in the past, saying that women were the matriarchs. And I need to remind you today, every woman that is in this room, you are a matriarch. And I hope that in writing continued literature, that they refresh the context, how they refer to us. Because you know what, for a while there, I really got caught up in that book, Dead Income. The Inconvenient Indian. Oh, that chapter on dead Indian, live Indian, legal Indian had me going for a while. Oh, trying to figure out, like, are we dead? Well, the language does somewhat refer to us in the context of past and not present. So what does a live Indian look like today? And yes, by the way, I know the Indian Act. Yeah. There were a number of things that happened in the Indian Act. One was really upset the balance of our societies. We really need to understand this. I could not understand this for a long time. How, when an Indian woman married a white man, that she would lose her status. And then yet, a white woman, upon marrying an Indian, would gain status. It took me a long time to understand that. Part of me, it was really hard. I had to deal with some of my anger. I said, those darn European women were jealous. Jeez. I heard. So I'm trying to find a lady. I know I was trying to find a lady. Yeah. Whatever it is, it did happen. And you know, I'm very lucky at one time. I spent time with Jenny Margetts, Nellie Carlson, who were part of the Indian Rights Movement women movement. The hard part of this is you have to understand how the state dealt with this. And how people and families were repatriated under Bill C-31. Bill C-31 has really affected our codes and how people are continued to be registered today. And if you read Harry Daniels' writings, he actually rewrote it. He didn't call it Bill C-31, he actually called it the Abbotside Bill. The Aboriginal Genocide Bill. Okay? He wrote that. Because of how the codes list children, or as members or not. Because right now, we are in the state, we have to hire a lawyer to get my grandson possibly registered as a status Indian. The other thing that happened, we need to colonizers got here, they had presumption. They had a presumption that men ran our communities. You can say it was matriarchal. There, right off the bat, was a misconception. And you'll have to remember when the system enforced the Election Act system, to some degree, it became more patriarchal electoral system than continuing to complement the matriarchal society that continued to exist. The other thing that happened, oh my God, how many more things could happen to these women that these did? The other thing that happened was, instead of the man moving to the woman's camp upon marriage, the woman had to move away from him. Therefore, again, upsetting the balance of our matriarchal society. In the back of this, I'm trying to answer the question, how would you like to wrong? Because I'm still trying to figure that out. Some of this stuff really hurts, you know, it really does. So I never thought things like this could ever be done with a human being. During the time when the Indian agents were still upon the prairies, they also had control of food and rations. There were some interesting Indian agents, but who exploited their power. So it is written. This man, this man was hungry and wanted food, wanted immediate food, went to request from the Indian agent the food that had been sent down for them. The Indian agent said, "Send me your 12-year-old boy, and I will give you food." Again, constantly just accessing food, which was their right. And I never thought years later that a woman would ever have beads sutured in her arm to shut a wound. I thought it later was something that she would like and enjoy. And I need to, again, remind you during the phase of residential school, the amount of young boys and young girls that were harmed, raped, and tortured. Some died and had to come home. You know, because it's amazing. I went to the 100th centenary of the residential school, which is a school that I attended. And I got to go through the book. It's a big book. And froze to death, ran away, all these different reasons. Malnutrition, like, oh, look at that, malnutrition. You know, just all these different things. So, but yet being in residential school, having to go through social studies, and even at that time, hearing pagans, savages, you know, and having to undo all that, to know, as a woman today, I am worthy. We're not pagans, we're not savages. I pity the people that did not understand our greatness when we met them. So, the hard part about this too is, you know, learned behavior of our colonizers. Sometimes victims become victimizers. I pray we get through this. All of us. Acknowledge our shared history and not address another road to reconciliation and healing for all of us. Not just about Indian people, about all of us. How we all right or wrong, and how we accept individual responsibility for change. I love what Judge Riley wrote, because I continue to echo some of the stuff that he said. Stop the Indian industry. stop the cult of dependency and the vested interest in Indian dysfunction. Because little we realize is our big economic resource. Saskatchewan probably related to that. There was another thing in our language that came up recently as well, and I remember using this word in the 90s. I remember I was doing a pamphlet on the centers I was opening up. And I'd given it to the board and they okayed it. And I'd used the word dysfunctional. I went back home and I felt really bad. How dare I be disrespectful to people in my community? We are highly functional considering the trauma we have lived through. Therefore, I do not use that word dysfunctional in any association in context of talking about us as First Nations. We are highly functional. Considering the distress that a lot of families are still going through, what, 10 generations later? 7? Maybe more. So over the last while, little do I realize sometimes I would pray for silly things. What I prayed for was that the truth come out. That people with racist attitudes start putting them out. No, really. So it was interesting. I tested a number of times. One, I'm having my breakfast. Remind me about the bridge. But I'm having my breakfast. And I hear the next table, and I was reading in the paper about the 60 scoop and all that stuff, but I hear the next table, these gentlemen talking. And they go like this. Hey, I read the paper today, once those Indian people, once it got, scooped out, adopted out. So, yeah, okay, yeah. Well, I don't know, they're coming back now, they want money. This was the police that got me. We should have just left them on the fucking grave to die. That's what he said. Oh, boy, Jeff. Boy, I just fought that urge. Because what I'd also prayed for was that I would not become them. So I got up and I went to the table and I said, "Sir, did I hear what you said?" I said, "Nothing." I said, "Sir, I'm not deaf, I'm not dumb. This is exactly what I heard you say." I said it out loud in the restaurant. I'm shaking. Oh, boy. Pardon me, eh? I just want to fight. I didn't want to say that word. That word. It doesn't get us anywhere. That's the hard part. That's what I heard. So I said, "Sir," I did hear what you say. That is rude, that is ignorant, and it is mean. And today it is hurtful. I went back to my table, and I left the restaurant. I didn't go back for a while. When I did, the waitress came up and says, "Oh, Brenda, it's nice to see you. I apologize for the gentleman." "Why don't I apologize for them? I prayed for them." The other one, July 1st. What happened July 1st? Yeah, on the bridge. And I didn't do it on purpose. I brought out 2 kinds of paint. I really didn't know that. Paint doesn't wash off. So what I was doing was I was warming people's feet every once in a while. And they'd ask me what for. And I'd say, "I'm trying to get at least 1,200 pairs of feet on the bridge in honor of murder missing." So I'm doing it to a couple of young girls and this gentleman and his wife walked by. And he asked me, "What are you doing?" So I explained to him, just like I was explaining to him what I was doing. So I explained to him. And he looks at me and he says, "Gee whiz, I wish you people would get over this." And remember, I prayed for this. So I stepped back because little Mika got a little bit hurt. I said, "Sir, what does it hurt? To have our world, that is our reality. Just to make a conscious reality in another person's world. You should just stop this now. We got it, man, we got it." So I said, "Sir, if we got it, can you please help us then fix it? And he looked at his wife and but remember, I prayed for that. Not to become. To be me. Every one of us has a responsibility and a role to educate people the best way we can. Sometimes don't need to tell you, if that person's on fire, man, no. Let them extinguish their own fire. Yeah, and then you put a switch, just won't add to their fire. Yeah? But you can do that. I've done that with people. I call it baking. So I just keep on saying, I'm done. Because if you want to let the match, I can do that. But I don't really listen. So, really amazing what happens. So I guess a part of it now, in coming today, each and every one of you have to figure out when you go to your home fires, is there 4 things different that you can do today? Because to try and change the world, I'm going to tell you, I'm not going to do this for many years. Just getting white. And that's reality. Each one of us has to accept responsibility to make a change in the world. On your way home this evening and the next days, put your list together. What are 4 ways you can make a difference? Raising your children. Raising boys differently. Raising girls differently. Trying to make a difference. Be kind. Interjecting. Helping people understand, and this is really interesting because I had to have a conversation with someone the other day about what is tolerance. You know, what is tolerance? Accepting to some degree you may have a difference of opinion, but hey man, I still love you. Yeah. So, I guess the other piece too, though, is I still continue to pray for a world to be different. I too do not like seeing on Facebook people missing. I know that there's courts coming up too for Maxine and for Michelle. It's almost as if they want to re-traumatize the families by not feeling guilty. Another one comes up Monday. I pray for them. I pray for these people that they realize this is nonsense. You've already been found once, been found guilty. I remember Alice Babel, partly because I was a young teenager, helping her family, and her telling me about Patsy being missing. I think people were witness to the reality beside her. I think people have slowly woken up to the reality that there are women who are going missing, murdered in most cases. And what I need to remind you, I think what I came here today to remind you, I stand here knowing my worthiness. I will not be displaced anymore. I will not be dismissed anymore, because that's a terrible thing. And even to do it, I will try not to do that anymore. To walk with kindness, to walk with graciousness, and to walk with forgiveness. I pray one day to get to the 4th world space. That we, all peoples, understand there's but one mother. We do not start speaking for her. I work with kids. I ask them, without Mother Earth, where will we be? I love what they say. They say, Brenda, we cease to exist. Which is true. And I believe Musha had a dream not too long ago about seeing people floating. I'm going, oh, I think I understand. There's but one Mother Earth. We need, yes, to redress all these, and I hate using that word, issues. Because I'm going, what shoes are you going to put on today? Poverty, you know. Shoes, come on. So, I thank you very much. I challenge you back, each and every one of you, on your way home. It's like the housing issue. The mayor does not want to have a summit. Yeah, right. Just because they address it a little bit does not mean that they do not need to continue talking about 5-year growth spans and continued growth in our city. Because we do have obvious homelessness. Not hopelessness, it is homelessness. And that is a reality. We need to continue to work on this, so I ask you, be a fire starter. Be a good fire starter. Ignite that fire within and continue to ignite other people's fire. Open those eyes, those hearts, and make that next world.
Okay, I would like to thank you, Deborah Dubois. You are definitely Brenda. Oh, yes, we have it. Brenda. Sorry. You're definitely an inspiration to inspire others to stand up for these issues and face them. You have done many great things for First Nations people and the issues surrounding them. So I thank you for that. Now, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Regina. I am the Vice President for the Indigenous Students Association here at the University of Regina. I was asked to speak about, say some words because I know time is, short. Anyways, I was asked to speak what is, important to me regarding missing and murdered Indigenous women. And, I have so much to say about that topic, so much, I could probably stand up here for hours, but I'm not going to do that to you guys. So, that's Saturday stuff, but anyways, I guess what I have to say about that is, I don't really know exactly how to put it, but why? And I guess what can I do about it? And not just what can I do about it, but what can we do about it? Like, yes, this is an issue. Yes, it's always going to be an issue, sadly, if we don't do something about it. Now, I have a plan for the future, but just that issue, and I guess I look at myself and I think, okay, how can I help people? Well, I have to start off by looking at myself and making sure that I'm okay from the inside, being an Indigenous woman. Like, am I perfectly fine, as myself? Am I healthy, mentally, physically, maybe, but mentally on the inside, am I healthy? And, at one point I wasn't healthy. I was in an abusive relationship prior, and I was at a very low point in my life, and it took me a lot to actually get, away from that point to be where I am today. It took a lot, and I drive through North Central sometimes, driving through getting to a destination, and I see women, on the streets, hookers, standing there, and it really bugs me. I don't think I can ever get comfortable with seeing them when I drive by. It hurts me on the inside. It's hard because I'm only one person, but I think that, in the future to come, I really want to start a campaign for women. And, especially, First Nation women, but just women in general, because it's not just Aboriginal women that are going missing. It's women as well, just from other ethnicities and races and stuff. I want to start a campaign with, leaders, female leaders, female role models. We need more of that. We do have lots, but I think we need to show, our female women that, not our female women, sorry. Our Indigenous women that. We need to show them that there are women who were probably in the situation, the same situation that they're in right now. And, how did they get out of there? How did they get out of that hole? I want to get in that hole with them and guide them out of there. And, I think a campaign would be awesome to start. I'm just throwing off my ideas. Just to get, that wheel going, that possibility that we can do something about it. And, we're going to do something about it. I'm tired of, seeing this stuff and just, people, okay, this and that. No, let's do something now. Let's do it now. We're going to do it now. And I think a campaign would be awesome to do that, to actually get into these communities, to actually get interaction with these people and say that we see you. We're not walking by you, we're not looking past you, we actually see you. And you're there. We want to help you. And I think we need to actually look from within as well and make sure that we're okay. Because these women are not. They have obviously, self-confidence issues, personal issues, and we need to help them to build that, get that going, bring it up, We need to have them put themselves on a pedestal. Because right now they're not. And I hate seeing that. I hate seeing beautiful, strong women, get treated like crap or allow people to treat them like that. And I feel like I should, maybe another time I will say more. But yes, that was just, I just need to get this off my chest. And there's probably way more that I could say, but the time and I don't want to. Anyways, I'm going to now introduce Stephen Obey Littlepet, who will be performing a hoop dance, and he actually gave me this to say about him, which is really cute. Anyways, it says Stephen Obey Jr. is 9 years old and goes to Holy Rosary Catholic School and is in grade 4. Stephen has been hoop dancing since he was 4 years old, and he was taught by his uncle Terrence Littlepet. The 1998 world champion hoop dancer, Stephen wants to follow his uncle's footsteps of becoming a world champion hoop dancer, and Stephen uses 17 hoops. Singing for Stephen is his brothers Brandon Key and Jarvis Obey.
together and talking about reconciliation and what that means to the youth of today, which is extremely important, especially in events like this, and at universities and in high schools and in justice systems and all over the place. So that is what Canadian Roots Exchange is. Lee, Giselle, and Austin are the first team here in Regina. So that's very exciting, and we're very proud to have this at the university and so happy to have the support from the community and professors and students at the university. And I just want to end tonight on a quote that I found very powerful and inspirational to myself, and I think it will be for everyone here. And it's from the Native Women's Association of Canada, What Their Stories Tell Us, research findings from Sisterhood and Spirit Initiative. Despite the many layers of trauma experienced by Aboriginal peoples throughout history and into today, Aboriginal men, women, their families, and communities continue to live and love, work, teach, protect, provide, hope, create, and dream. It is a legacy of strength and resilience, one more powerful than colonialism.